Oh, don't be dramatic. She's fine. Just a bit of a scare. Children are resilient. The words, delivered with a dismissive wave of her hand, still echo in my mind years later. They were spoken by my own mother, in the sterile scent of the hospital corridor, just hours after my daughter, my precious Lily, had been airlifted from our local emergency room. Lily, who had been found blue and barely breathing, a terrifyingly still little heap at the bottom of the stairs. My mother, who I'd expected to see pale with worry, instead looked bored. Or perhaps, faintly amused. That look, coupled with the casual cruelty of her words, was the first tremor in the foundation of everything I thought I knew about her. My life before that day had been a carefully constructed piece. A good marriage, a healthy child, a comfortable home. My mother, Eleanor, was a constant, albeit often abrasive, presence. She was the kind of woman who believed in appearances above all else, who measured success in dollars and social standing. She'd always been controlling, subtly undermining my confidence, making me feel perpetually inadequate. But I'd learned to navigate it, to build my own world, a sanctuary for Lily and my husband, Mark. I'd attributed her harshness to her own difficult upbringing, a survival mechanism, I'd told myself. I'd learned to compartmentalize, to accept her flawed love and focus on the good. Until that day. The normalcy shattered that night. Lily's recovery was slow, fraught with doctor's appointments and hushed worries. My mother, meanwhile, seemed to be operating on a different plane. She'd call, not to ask about Lily's latest test results, but to complain about her golf club membership fees or to ask if I'd seen the price of her favorite cashmere sweater. It was as if Lily's brush with death, her fragility, was an inconvenient distraction from the more pressing matters of Eleanor's privileged existence. I'd push the unease down, telling myself it was just her way, that she loved Lily in her own way. I remembered another instance, a few years prior. Lily was about 5, and had scraped her knee badly, a deep gash that needed stitches. We were at my parents' summer house, a sprawling, impersonal place Eleanor adored because it was impressive. Lily was sobbing, her small face streaked with tears and blood. I was trying to soothe her, clean the wound, when Eleanor walked in. She took one look, her perfectly manicured eyebrows drawing together. Honestly, child, such a fuss. You're going to ruin that pretty dress with bloodstains. Can't you just stop crying and be a brave girl? It wasn't sympathy she offered, but a critique of Lily's emotional display and a concern for a material object. I scooped Lily into my arms, murmuring reassurances, while Eleanor sighed theatrically and left the room, presumably to polish her silver. These weren't isolated incidents. They were patterns, threads woven into the fabric of our family dynamic, each one a small, sharp tug on my increasingly frayed nerves. The day the hospital bill arrived was supposed to be a turning point. It was a staggering sum, and I was drowning in worry. Mark and I were discussing how to manage it, exploring loan options. Eleanor had just dropped by, ostensibly to check on things, but really, I suspected, to ensure her image as the benevolent matriarch was intact. She sat on our sofa, sipping the expensive tea I'd made for her, her gaze flicking over the stacks of paperwork on our coffee table. I braced myself for a platitude, a hollow offer of help. Instead, she leaned forward, a calculating glint in her eyes. You know, darling, she began, her voice silken, I've been meaning to sort out my own financial affairs. It's all become rather complicated. I've been thinking about restructuring things. She gestured vaguely towards a thick manila envelope on the table. You've always been so responsible. Perhaps you could help me with that. I picked up the envelope, my fingers tracing the faded label, Eleanor Vance, Personal Investments. A prickle of unease traced its way up my spine. Eleanor rarely shared details of her finances, viewing them as her own private kingdom. What kind of restructuring? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Oh, just optimizing things. You know, she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Making sure everything is where it should be. No unnecessary taxes, no loose ends. She tapped a manicured nail on the envelope. "I was hoping you could take a look. I'm sure you'll see how sensible it all is." That was the moment. The casual way she handed over the envelope, the almost too casual mention of optimizing and no unnecessary taxes. It wasn't about helping me with Lily's bills, not even indirectly. It was about her and her meticulously constructed financial empire and a sudden, unsettling need for me to be involved, or perhaps, to be a witness. The room felt suddenly colder, the air thick with unspoken implications. The memory of her dismissive laugh at the hospital, her lack of empathy for Lily, slammed into me with renewed force. This wasn't a loving gesture. It was a transaction. And I was about to be handed the ledger. I took the envelope home. That night, long after Mark had fallen asleep, I sat at my kitchen table, the single overhead light casting harsh shadows. The envelope contained not just investment statements and tax returns, but a dizzying array of documents. There were offshore account details, complex shell corporations, and handwritten notes detailing transactions that seemed, at best, questionable. The sheer volume of it was overwhelming, but as I sifted through it, a picture began to emerge. A picture of a woman who had built her wealth not just through shrewd investments, but through careful, deliberate evasion. The optimizing Eleanor had spoken of wasn't legal tax planning, it was a systematic effort to hide assets, to misrepresent income, to operate in the shadows. It was fraud. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a few minor oversights, this was a sophisticated, multi-year operation. And she had handed me the keys. Why? Was it a test? A veiled threat? Or had she simply become so brazen, so convinced of her own untouchability, that she saw no risk in involving me? The thought of Lily, so innocent, so vulnerable, struggling to recover, while her grandmother was busy building a fortress of illicit wealth, filled me with a cold rage. I spent weeks immersed in the papers. I consulted discreetly with a lawyer, then an accountant, both of whom confirmed my worst fears. The advice I received was stark: report it. But the idea of a public scandal, of dragging my mother through the mud, was abhorrent. Yet, the alternative, letting this continue, knowing what I knew, felt like complicity. I pictured Lily growing up, learning about her grandmother's legacy, and the shame that would follow. One rainy Tuesday, I found a small, locked wooden box tucked away in the back of Eleanor's financial files. It felt significant. Mark helped me pry it open. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed photographs and a few pieces of jewelry, were ledgers. These weren't business ledgers, they were personal accounts, detailed records of cash payments, of gifts to certain individuals, of expenses that were clearly not legitimate business costs. And woven through these entries, with chilling regularity, were notations referring to specific legal and accounting firms, and dates. Dates that coincided with audits. Dates that suggested a deliberate pattern of obfuscation and bribery. That was it. The final, irrefutable proof. The quiet, terrifying certainty settled over me. I looked at the ledgers, then at the photos, Eleanor's younger self beaming, her now-grown children beside her. A wave of something akin to pity, quickly overshadowed by a steely resolve, washed over me. She had made her choices. And now, so would I. I didn't confront her. Confrontation would only lead to denial, to manipulation, to more lies. Instead, I gathered the evidence. Every document, every ledger, every offshore account number. I photocopied everything, meticulously organizing it into folders, cross-referencing dates and names. I then took the original documents, the very ones Eleanor had entrusted to me, and carefully placed them back into the manila envelope. The next time Eleanor visited, she was in a rare good mood, having just returned from a golf trip. She was recounting a particularly dramatic tale of a birdie on the 17th hole when I simply held out the manila envelope. "I've gone through everything, Mother," I said, my voice steady. "It's all very thorough." She took the envelope, a faint smile on her lips, expecting effusive praise for her financial acumen. She opened it, flipping through the papers. The smile faltered. her eyes narrowed as she reached the section detailing the offshore accounts. Then, she saw the ledgers. The color drained from her face, replaced by a stark, dawning horror. Her manicured hand trembled as she clutched the papers. What is this?" she stammered, her voice a thin whisper. I didn't answer. I simply watched her, the carefully constructed facade crumbling before my eyes. The smugness, the entitlement, the casual cruelty, it all evaporated, leaving behind a raw, naked fear. She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading, but I offered no comfort, no absolution. "I've made some copies," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "For my own records. Just in case." She stammered something, her mind clearly racing, trying to find a way out, a way to spin this, to manipulate me. But the foundation of our relationship had shifted irrevocably. I had seen too much, understood too much. "I think you should go now, Mother," I said, turning away, a profound sense of emptiness settling in. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. She looked at the envelope, then at me, and for the first time, I saw not a formidable matriarch, but a frightened woman facing the consequences of her own carefully crafted edifice of deception. She left without another word, the heavy silence of the house pressing in behind her. The fallout was swift and brutal, though not in the way Eleanor likely imagined. There were no dramatic arrests, no public pronouncements. Instead, there was a cold, calculated dismantling. I had anonymously provided the authorities with a detailed dossier, a meticulously compiled roadmap of her financial transgressions. The lawyers and accountants she had relied on for years, the ones whose names appeared in her ledgers, were now faced with a choice: cooperate or face charges themselves. Eleanor's world began to unravel from the inside out. Whispers turned into hushed conversations, then into outright speculation. Her social circle, built on the illusion of wealth and respectability, began to distance themselves. The invitations stopped arriving. The calls went unanswered. Her children, initially furious, then bewildered, eventually found themselves entangled in legal battles and financial audits. I received frantic texts, tearful calls from distant relatives, all demanding explanations, accusing me of betrayal. Eleanor's flying monkeys were in full force. But I remained silent. I had no desire to engage, to defend myself, to explain the years of subtle abuse, the dismissiveness, the near-fatal indifference. My satisfaction wasn't in their outrage, but in the quiet, inexorable collapse of her carefully constructed life. Her financial ruin wasn't immediate, but it was absolute. The authorities, armed with irrefutable evidence, systematically dismantled her empire. Assets were seized, accounts frozen, and the illusion of her boundless wealth evaporated like mist in the morning sun. She was left with a fraction of what she once possessed, enough to live, perhaps, but stripped of the power, the status, the very essence of what defined her. I never saw her again. Mark and I moved Lily to a different school district, further away from the shadows of her influence. Lily, blissfully unaware of the intricate web of deceit and its subsequent unraveling, continued to grow and thrive, her laughter once again filling our home. There were no fireworks, no cathartic screams, no grand pronouncements of victory. The justice I delivered was quiet, methodical, and absolute. It was the cold, hard truth of consequences, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. I had simply shown her the receipts for a lifetime of moral bankruptcy. And in the end, that was enough. The silence that followed was not empty, but full. Full of the quiet resolution that comes from knowing you have finally, irrevocably, set things right.